Come along for the ride.
Welcome to the Solar Coaster, the wild ride to the solar industry told by the people living it every day. I'm Anna Covert.
And I'm Alex Herrera.
Think about the last time you looked at a solar panel on a roof or passed a massive field of them driving down the highway. It looks so simple, right? Just these quiet, dark blue mirrors soaking up the sun. But behind those silent panels lies one of the most complex, high stakes industrial chess games on the planet. We are talking about a global scramble for raw materials, high tech manufacturing, and trillions of dollars in economic power. Today, we are diving deep into how this puzzle is being put together, specifically looking at a fascinating tool that tracks every piece of this puzzle in real time, the Solar and Storage Supply Chain Dashboard.
It really is a modern gold rush, but instead of pickaxes, we are talking about polysilicon ingots, lithium ion cells, and multi gigawatt factories. For years, the story of clean energy was simple: design it here, build it somewhere else, mostly in Asia. But recently, there has been a massive shift. We are seeing an unprecedented push to bring that entire supply chain back home. The dashboard we are looking at tracks this massive industrial migration. It shows where these factories are being built, what they are making, and whether these ambitious announcements are actually turning into real operating factories.
And that distinction is huge, isn't it? The difference between an announcement and an operating factory. It is incredibly easy to issue a press release saying you are going to build a $3 billion factory. It is a completely different beast to actually pour the concrete, install the clean rooms, hire thousands of workers, and start shipping products. When you look at the landscape right now, what is the actual ratio of hype to reality? How much of this domestic supply chain is actually running today versus just being a blueprint on a developer's desk?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question. If you look at the data, there has been an absolute explosion of announcements, especially after major policy shifts like the Inflation Reduction Act. We are talking about hundreds of gigawatts of capacity announced across the solar and storage sectors. But if you dig into the operational status, you see a very clear bottleneck. The final step of the process, assembling solar modules, is growing incredibly fast. We have a lot of operational module factories. But as you move upstream back to the raw materials and the highly complex chemical processing, the progress is much slower. Now, we are talking about years of lead time to build polysilicon refineries or wafer manufacturing plants. So right now we are in this transition phase where we can assemble the final product, but we are still largely relying on imported components to do it.
So it is a bit like importing all the ingredients for a cake, mixing them together, baking it locally, and calling it a homegrown cake. You are still vulnerable if the shipping lines for the flour and sugar get disrupted. Why is it so much harder to build those upstream facilities? Is it just a matter of money, or is there a deeper technological and environmental hurdle we are overlooking?
It is a mix of both, but the technology and energy requirements are massive. Take polysilicon, for example. This isn't just melting sand. It is a highly complex chemical process that requires refining silicon to a purity of 99.9999999%. That is 9 nines of purity. To do that, you need an incredible amount of electricity, highly specialized chemical reactors, and strict environmental permits. The same goes for ingots and wafers, where you have to grow massive single crystal silicon cylinders at extreme temperatures and then slice them with wire saws thinner than a human hair. These factories take years to build, require billions in upfront capital, and need a highly trained workforce that frankly hasn't existed in large numbers outside of East Asia for decades. So, building a module assembly plant is relatively quick. You can set one up in 12 to 18 months in an existing warehouse. A polysilicon or wafer plant, you are looking at 3 to 5 years easily.
It is fascinating because it highlights a classic industrial chicken and egg problem. Developers want to build module plants because they are faster to market and cheaper to set up. But those plants need cells, which need wafers, which need ingots, which need polysilicon. If you don't build the foundation of the pyramid, the top is always unstable. But from an investor's perspective, putting money into a 5-year project with massive technological risk is a tough sell when policy landscapes can change with every election cycle. How does the dashboard show this geographical distribution? Are these facilities clustering in specific regions, or is it spread out evenly across the country?
It is definitely not even. We are seeing the emergence of what people are calling the battery belt and the solar belt. primarily stretching across the American South and parts of the Midwest. States like Georgia, Ohio, the Carolinas, and Texas are becoming absolute powerhouses for clean energy manufacturing. There are a few reasons for this. First, you have cheaper land and lower energy costs, which is crucial for energy-intensive manufacturing like polysilicon and battery cells. Second, these states often have existing automotive or industrial manufacturing ecosystems, meaning there is already a pool of skilled labor and logistics infrastructure. And third, state-level incentives are playing a massive role. Governors and local governments are competing fiercely to land these multi-billion-dollar projects because they bring thousands of high-paying jobs.
Which creates an interesting political dynamic. Many of the states benefiting the most from these clean energy manufacturing investments are politically conservative, even though the federal policies driving these investments were passed by a progressive administration. It shows that economic reality often overrides political rhetoric. When you are talking about thousands of construction jobs and long-term manufacturing employment, that is a win for any local community, regardless of their stance on climate change. But let's talk about the storage side of things. The dashboard isn't just about solar, it is also about energy storage. And in many ways, the storage supply chain is even more complex because it overlaps so heavily with the electric vehicle market. How is the domestic battery manufacturing landscape shaping up?
The scale of battery manufacturing announcements is staggering, and you are spot on. The overlap with the automotive industry is driving this at warp speed. Every major automaker is partnering with battery manufacturers to build joint venture gigafactories. But the stationary storage market, the massive batteries used by utilities to stabilize the grid, is also riding this wave. The challenge here is the chemistry and the raw materials. Unlike solar, which is mostly silicon-based, batteries require lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, and graphite. The extraction and refining of these minerals are heavily concentrated in a few countries, with China dominating the refining capacity. So even if we build the gigafactories to make the battery cells here, we are still highly dependent on a global supply chain for the refined minerals.
That feels like a massive geopolitical vulnerability. If we transition our entire energy grid to rely on solar and storage, but we don't secure the mineral supply chain, we are essentially trading our dependence on foreign oil for a dependence on foreign minerals. How are companies and policymakers trying to solve this? Are we seeing investments in domestic mining and refining, or is the focus more on recycling and alternative chemistries?
It has to be all of the above. There is a push to develop domestic mining, like the lithium projects in Nevada and California's Salton Sea. But mining projects face intense environmental scrutiny and local opposition, often taking a decade or more to get approved. So, in the short term, companies are looking at two other avenues. First, recycling. Battery recycling is going to be a massive industry because the metals in a dead battery are already refined and highly concentrated. It is much easier to get lithium out of an old battery than out of the ground. Second, alternative chemistries. For stationary grid storage, weight doesn't matter as much as it does for an electric vehicle. You don't need the absolute highest energy density if the battery is just sitting on a concrete pad next to a solar farm. So we are seeing a lot of interest in iron-based chemistries like lithium iron phosphate or even flow batteries and sodium ion batteries, which use much more abundant and less geopolitically sensitive materials.
That makes a lot of sense. You don't need a lightweight, high-density battery for a utility-scale project. You just need something cheap, durable, and safe. But let's look at the timeline. The dashboard shows a massive pipeline of projects. If you look out to 2030, what does the ideal scenario look like if even 80% of these announced projects actually get built? Do we become completely self-sufficient, or are we still part of a global web?
Even in the most optimistic scenario, we will still be part of a global web. And honestly, that might not be a bad thing. Complete autarky, total self-sufficiency is incredibly expensive and probably unrealistic. But what we can achieve is resilience through diversification. If we can build enough domestic capacity to meet our baseline needs and source the rest from a diverse group of allied nations, we dramatically reduce the risk of a single point of failure. By 2030, if the current trajectory holds, we could easily meet our entire domestic demand for solar module assembly and a significant portion of our battery cell manufacturing. The real test will be whether we have successfully built out the midstream, the wafers, cells, and chemical refining. If we don't secure those links, our domestic factories will remain high-tech assembly lines rather than true manufacturing hubs.
It is like building a car factory, but relying on another country to supply all the engines and transmissions. You are still at their mercy. And this brings us to the broader economic question. Building all of this domestic capacity is incredibly expensive. Capital costs are higher in the West, labor costs are higher, and environmental regulations are much stricter. Won't this push up the cost of clean energy for consumers? For years, the narrative was that solar is getting cheaper and cheaper. Does reshoring the supply chain mean we have to accept higher prices for clean energy in exchange for security?
That is one of the most critical debates happening right now. In the short term, yes, domestic components will likely carry a premium. It simply costs more to build and operate a factory in Ohio or Georgia than it does in regions with lower labor standards and subsidized energy. However, the hope is that over the long term, we will see a learning curve effect. As we build more of these factories, we will innovate, automate, and optimize the processes, bringing costs down. Plus, you have to factor in the hidden costs of the old model, shipping logistics, supply chain disruptions, tariffs, and geopolitical risks. When a shipping container cost spikes tenfold as it did during the pandemic, that cheap overseas panel suddenly isn't so cheap anymore. A local supply chain offers predictability and stability, and for developers building multi-billion-dollar projects, predictability is often worth paying a premium for.
It is the classic insurance policy argument. You pay a bit more upfront to avoid a catastrophic loss down the road, but this transition also requires a massive workforce. We are talking about tens of thousands of jobs in highly specialized fields. Where are these workers coming from? Are we seeing universities and trade schools adapting to train the next generation of solar engineers and battery technicians? Or is the talent shortage going to be the ultimate bottleneck that slows all of this down?
The talent shortage is a very real bottleneck. We are not just talking about PhD scientists designing new battery chemistries. We are talking about process engineers, quality control technicians, machine operators, and maintenance staff who understand how to run automated production lines. Many of these factories are being built in areas that historically relied on agriculture or traditional manufacturing, so there is a massive retraining effort required. We are seeing community colleges partnering directly with these new factories to create specialized certification programs. For example, a student can do a 6-month program focused specifically on battery manufacturing and walk straight into a job. But it is a race against time. The factories are being built faster than the workforce is being trained.
And it is not just about training new workers, it is also about keeping them. The manufacturing sector is competing with every other industry for talent. If the work is demanding and the pay isn't competitive with other sectors, these factories will struggle to run at full capacity. It really shows how interconnected this all is. You can't just look at the technology or the finance. You have to look at the human element, the local communities, and the educational systems. It is a total societal shift.
Absolutely. And that is why tools like this supply chain dashboard are so valuable. They take this massive abstract concept of the energy transition and ground it in physical reality. You can look at the map and see, oh, there is a new cell manufacturing plant being built in my state, or there is a recycling facility planned nearby. It makes the transition tangible. It also allows policymakers and investors to see where the gaps are. If everyone is investing in module assembly, but nobody is investing in wafers, the dashboard makes that imbalance obvious, allowing the market or policy to correct itself.
It acts like a diagnostic tool for the entire clean energy economy. It shows us where the patient is healthy and where there is a blockage. But as we look at this map, we also have to think about the global context. While we are building out our capacity, other countries aren't sitting still. Europe is trying to reshore its own supply chains. India is investing heavily in domestic manufacturing, and China is continuing to scale up its already massive capacity. Are we heading toward a world of oversupply where everyone has built massive factories and we suddenly have more solar panels and batteries than we know what to do with?
That is a very real possibility, and in some sectors, we are already seeing signs of it. China's manufacturing capacity alone is currently large enough to meet the entire world's demand for solar panels. This has led to a massive drop in global prices, which is great for developers who want to install solar cheap, but it makes it incredibly difficult for new domestic factories in the US or Europe to compete. If a foreign competitor can sell a panel for less than it cost you to make it, your factory is in trouble. This is why trade policy, tariffs, and domestic content bonuses are so central to this discussion. Without these protective measures, many of the announced factories on the dashboard might never make it to the operational phase because they simply won't be financially viable.
It is a delicate balancing act. If you put up too many trade barriers to protect domestic factories, you make solar panels more expensive, which slows down the deployment of clean energy and makes it harder to meet climate goals. But if you don't protect them, you lose the manufacturing base and remain dependent on foreign supply chains. It is a tightrope walk between speed of deployment and security of supply.
Exactly. There is a tension between the climate goal of deploying as much solar as fast as possible, which favors cheap imports, and the economic and national security goal of building a domestic manufacturing base, which requires protecting local industries. Different countries are choosing different paths along that spectrum. The U.S. has leaned heavily into using tax incentives and tariffs to build a domestic wall, while other regions are taking different approaches. There is no easy answer, and the path we choose will shape our economy for the next half century.
It really forces us to ask what we value more. Is it the rapid reduction of carbon emissions at all costs, or is it the creation of a resilient domestic industrial base that can sustain us for the long haul? Ideally, we find a middle ground, but the road there is going to be incredibly bumpy. As we wrap up this discussion, I am struck by how much this dashboard represents a snapshot of a moment in history. We are watching the rebuilding of the world's energy infrastructure in real time. It is messy, it is expensive, and it is full of risks, but it is also one of the most exciting industrial transformations since the dawn of the digital age.
It really is. The next decade will decide which of these projects on the map become permanent fixtures of our industrial landscape and which ones fade away as footnotes. But one thing is clear, the momentum is real, the capital is flowing, and the map of clean energy is being redrawn every single day. The question is no longer if the transition will happen, but where the technology that powers it will be made and who will control the supply chains of our future.
And that is a question that affects every single one of us, from the energy bills we pay to the jobs available in our communities to the geopolitical stability of the world our children will inherit. It is a story that is still being written, one factory, one wafer, and one battery cell at a time. We will definitely be keeping our eyes on that dashboard to see how the map changes in the months and years to come.
Hop on a solar coaster, come along for the ride.
This episode of The Solar Coaster is narrated using AI-generated technology, representing Anna Covert and Alex Herrera. The material presented is aggregated from publicly available solar industry news sources. All commentary reflects reported industry developments and does not constitute personal opinions, investment advice, or endorsements by the hosts or
Solar
producers.
Coaster is proudly sponsored by Sun Energy Today, redefining what solar means for business and infrastructure. We engineer and deliver large-scale clean energy solutions, from megawatt solar farms to advanced graphene storage, designed for resilience, performance, and measurable return. Sun Energy Today, built to power what's next. Learn more at sunenergytoday.com.